Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Monday, July 25th, 2022. A new dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary of African American English, will attempt to codify the contributions and capture the rich relationship Black Americans have with the English language. Also, this morning, the Justice Department opened a wide ranging investigation into the city of Houston's failure to address environmental racism, including the rampant dumping of garbage and even bodies in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods, according to the Department of Justice. We'll talk about that this morning. And also, boxing legend Mike Tyson thinks that his quote unquote expiration date is near. On the latest episode of his podcast, Hotboxin with Mike Tyson, the former champion discussed his mortality with guest Sean McFarlane. We'll dig into the mind of Mike Tyson this morning. Joining me is James Wright of the Washington Informer. James, good morning.
Good morning, Stacey Brown. I hope you're doing well during this very, very hot weather.
It is hot, James. It's hot in here.
Yes, yes. Don't finish that statement. Don't finish that statement, please.
I was thinking of Nelly, So, James, what do you think about this new dictionary? English has many words and expressions like shout out, which began in Black communities and it made its way around the country and then through the English speaking word. The process has been happening over generations, according to many language experts, adding an untold number of contributions to the language, including hip, get down to the nitty gritty, cool, and woke. Now, a new lexicon with Henry Louis Gates Jr. as editor in chief will collect definitions and histories of words. Gates says the bottom line of the African American people is that these are people who love language. Your thoughts on this new dictionary to include all what we know as they say, the Black lexicon?
Well, let me just say that I'm very happy that Dr. Gates is doing this because Black people have long had an influence on American language here in this country. As a matter of fact, quiet as it's kept, the Southern dialect and the Southern manner of speaking, even among the upper crust whites in the antebellum and post-Civil War, were influenced by African Americans, and that has continued to this day. Think about the word the okie doke. Don't fall for the okie doke.
Yep.
That's an African American expression. I really, really think he's on to something. Now, what I don't want to happen, Stacey, is that he gets into this thing about Ebonics. Now, you've heard of Ebonics. Ebonics is this so-called Black language, which is an offshoot of the American dialect, in terms of where we Black people supposedly have this unique language in our own community, and we talk to each other in a very special sort of way. I hope that he will probably incorporate some words from Ebonics, but I hope he doesn't basically say that Ebonics is the way Black people speak. That is not true. We focus, we can, in the boardroom, we talk one way, on the street, we talk another. That's just what we do.
Well, James, this is a project, this dictionary is a project of Harvard University's Hutchings Center for African American Research and Oxford University Press. So with that said, though, when you look up, and maybe I haven't researched it enough, I think I did, but when you look it up, James, Professor Gates is really about the only African American on this team. Does that pose some problems when you're trying to put together a so-called dictionary of Black language?
Yes, it does. For example, you're talking about Harvard University, so you're talking about upper crust white people. What could they possibly know about Black culture and Black language? I mean, they may look at what is that on the cable show, MTV, or they may occasionally look at BET and think, oh, that's Black culture and that's how Black people talk. Not really. But then again, what do they know? I'm very disturbed by it because Harvard University does not have to have a predominantly white staff in terms of Dr. Gates's project or even that particular department. They can bring in Dr. Cornell West, or they can bring in some outstanding scholars from Howard University or the other HBCUs in terms to help him with that project, which I think that's what he should do. He shouldn't just limit his research just to them, but he should reach out to the HBCUs like Howard and Hampton and the others in order to work on this project.
Yeah, well, we'll see what comes of this dictionary of Black lexicon. It says we will see, James. We'll keep tabs on it. Also, this morning, the Justice Department has opened a wide-ranging investigation into the city of Houston's failure to address environmental racism, including the rampant dumping of garbage and even bodies in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. The investigation was prompted by hundreds of resident complaints that was logged by a local legal aid group, and is likely to be one of the most ambitious environmental justice reviews undertaken by the department in recent years. The inquiry will be led by the Civil Rights Division in coordination with the department's new Environmental Justice Office. It's going to look into, James, whether officials in Houston, the nation's fourth largest city, systemically discriminated against residents by allowing 11 of 13 incinerators and landfills to be placed in the city's northeast section over the past several decades. So we see this. In fact, our president and CEO of the NNPA, Dr. Benjamin Chavis, has been a long fighting for environmental justice. And this is another example as to why that's needed, James.
Well, I think that this is a good move on the part of the Department of Justice. I'm kind of surprised the EPA hasn't jumped on this yet, but considering the EPA has its own full plate, the Department of Justice doing this is good. I think I've never believed that we have to quantify these things. You mentioned about the 11 of the 13 landfills in Northeast Houston, which is has a large Black community in that part of the city. Other parts tend to be in South Houston. And what that is saying is that the poor are the ones who bear the brunt of bad environmental policies. And this is not just consistent in Houston, but this is all over the country. And maybe, Stacey, this can serve like as a test case in terms of the beginning of the end of bad environmental practices in Black and Latino communities. This is just a start, but I think this is a wonderful idea. I think that this definitely should be kept up. And I commend the Department of Justice under Merrick Garland for actually initiating this.
But you see how bad the problem is. They are not just dumping waste and other things. They're dumping bodies, James.
Yeah.
That is really amazing that they've gotten many complaints about dumping bodies. How far will some people go?
When you think about dumping bodies, and I hate to get into the fictional realm, you think about The Godfather and all those type of movies with the mafia, but we won't talk about that. It's just an example of how lowly they regard the communities of color when it comes to environmental concerns. And many of our elected leaders, whether they're council members or state representatives or even mayors, have not really stepped up to the plate to explain and to eliminate this problem. And yes, Houston does have a Black mayor, Sylvester Turner, but I think this is more over his head. And by the time he became mayor, this was already in motion. I go back to what you were saying in terms of the 11 of the 13 landfills and incinerators for the city of Houston in that section of town is because they're not politically empowered as they should be. We certainly wouldn't see that on the west side of Houston. So this is the key, and we have to really get involved with this because it is our people, it is our health that is being involved by dumping dead bodies, and all that other kind of stuff there.
Yeah, the concerns about the environment have been very well known for some time, and we keep hearing about the destruction of the earth, basically, right? and
Mhm.
how things have just deteriorated, and we see the efforts, the failed efforts to pass any type of meaningful environmental legislation, any type of meaningful climate legislation. Um, why is that a problem when everyone can see it? And it just, we're talking about this black neighborhood in Houston, and you can think
Mhm.
about Detroit, you can think about Newark, New Jersey, you can think about other areas that are predominantly black that have these environmental problems. But it's not just a black problem. And don't our lawmakers realize that it's more than just a black problem?
Well, you can look here in Washington, D.C. For a long time, you had a Pepco plant located right off of the Anacostia River in Ward 7, which is a predominantly black, lower slash middle income neighborhood. People in D.C. have been complaining about that Pepco plant spewing out those toxins for years, but they were ignored. And D.C. is a progressive liberal city, so called. But people have to understand that a lot of money is involved here, and that's why they move those very dangerous setups, I'll call them setups, to black communities, because we do not put up the type of resistance to that that is needed, whether it's in Houston with those incinerators and landfills, whether it's in DC, that Benning Road plant. You would not put that up in Ward 3. That would not happen. So this is what we have got to come together around, an environmental agenda. One of the things that Dr. Chavis tried to do, and he succeeded to the best that he could in the 1980s, was to open black people up to this idea of environmental racism and to get the federal government to address it. But he was dealing with a Ronald Reagan who did not care about whether bad plans within black communities, because he didn't care anything about black communities. With Ann Burford running for the EPA and that his Justice Department. So we have to do this now, particularly with President Biden. This is a good lawsuit. This is a start, but we got to get involved in terms of stopping environmental racism.
Well, and again, you say we have to get involved, but why can't Congress come up with anything bipartisan that everyone can live with? Because look, if you don't come up with something you can live with, then it's going to kill you eventually, right? I mean, am I missing
Right.
something here?
That's right. You're not missing anything. What it is that these lobbyists from these large utility companies have a lot of money. They are very, very involved in the lobbying process, not only at the congressional level, but even at the local level. Hint, hint, DC Council. So therefore, that's why they're able to have their way. And these lobbyists are slick. They will even go to black lawmakers and say things like, well, we're locating the plant and the incinerators in the black community, but it produces jobs, and the jobs and this and these black lawmakers, getting the money as well as thinking about jobs for my community. They go for it without thinking about the health consequences down the road. But that type of far-reaching thinking is something that we kind of have to develop, later on. So that's why it's important that we must get involved and stay involved in the political process. We must expand our agenda to include environmental racism. And we have to become as expert, Stacy, in environmental racism as we are with police brutality.
Well,
So, and that's just the way it is.
Well, James, we this program, the Black Press of America, we continue to reach out to our lawmakers on Capitol Hill. There are times when we are successful in talking with them, and times we're not. But that's another problem, right? Because when the Black press or African American journalists do call even the Black members of Congress, they are shielded in a lot of ways by those who don't understand or know the plight of Black America, and that seems to be a problem there too. Getting our Congress people to really understand what is, concerning to their citizens, right?
Right, right. I had the unique vantage point in the 1990s, Stacy, to cover the Congressional Black Caucus for a black newspaper. And one of the things I found is that many of their staffers on Capitol Hill are white. And not
Yeah.
only are they white, they're really not too aware of what's going on in the Black community. They're so busy focusing on the overall legislative agenda, they're not really focused on helping the constituents in terms of the individual constituent matters. And a lot of and what happens is that it becomes a little clubby thing up on Capitol Hill. You're looking for a particular person with a particular credentials who can function in terms of the legislative process up there, as opposed to someone who could really help the Black communities that these Black representatives represent. And so that's what happens. That's why we become ineffective. There's something else that happens, Stacey, and we don't talk about this nearly as much because it's not brought up as an issue. A lot of times when Black legislators, whether it's on Capitol Hill or in Annapolis or the state's capital or here in DC, we don't really request to serve on committees that have to deal with the environment. We
Yeah.
we don't ask for that. We tend to, and justifiably so, we tend to ask for criminal justice. We tend to ask for health. We tend to ask for education, and we tend to ask for economic development. But we don't ask to serve on those environmental committees, and that's where a lot of the damage is being done. But our representatives don't request that because it's not sexy enough for them.
Well, I'll tell you, James, not too long ago, myself and our great producer Greer, we were invited to sit in on a Zoom that had the representatives of the Congressional Black Caucus, their press secretaries, their legislative directors, chief of staffs, etc. And I tell you what, we were hard pressed to find somebody who looked like us and who understood why we would be reaching out. So it's a battle. Walter Hill writes in on Facebook that the Black Caucus is, in his words, responsible for the war on drugs that basically gave Black people more time for the same drug crimes as their white counterparts. So when you don't have access to your lawmakers, and particularly we're specifically talking about our African American lawmakers, the Congressional Black Caucus, these are the things that will come out, right? These are the things that unchallenged. Because I'm not saying what Walter Hill, I'm not saying what Walter is wrong, and I can't say that he's right because I don't know that. But then you won't get a response from the Congressional Black Caucus on that.
Well, they're so busy, Stacey, and like I said, I covered Capitol Hill in the 1990s. They're so busy playing inside baseball, they're not really attacking the issues. They're so busy. Okay, am I going to be the subcommittee chairman, or am I going to be the committee chairman, or can I sit on this committee, or can I be the ranking member? And we don't see this from the outside. People don't see this. The constituents certainly don't see this, but that's what happens a lot of times on Capitol Hill. I would even suspect that is the case in these state capitals as well as in the local legislatures, such as the DC Council. And so they become so wrapped up into the inner politics of the institution that they're working with, they don't focus on the issues that they should. It's funny. I've been observing DC politics for the last 30 years, and I'm thinking about my friend Kevin Chavis Sr., and I'm thinking about my friend Kenyon McDuffie. When they arrived on the DC Council, Chavis like in 1994 and McDuffie 2012, they were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they were ready to take on the system and ready to do these things. But by the time they serve a few terms, they become institutionalists of the system, and they become, and I'm not being overly critical, but they become more concerned about getting that chairmanship, getting more money for their committees, and getting on a committee instead of dealing with the issues in their respective districts. I'm not putting them down, but that's just how the Wilson building as well as the Capitol Hill just catches you up. So you can't deal with Black issues because you've been too busy playing inside baseball.
Well, let me read what Paris Brown of the Baltimore Times writes in from Facebook. She says the Congressional Black Caucus is a LSO, and they are created to address issues that affect Black people because there is no standing committee to address our issues. So, yes, we should hold them accountable to bring up these issues. She says, James is right. I don't know if she means your last name is right. But Walter Hill goes on to say again, he writes back that the Black agenda has not changed in 100 years. We never got 40 acres and a mule, but right. Juneteenth is a national holiday. Lots of concerns. And these are the things that we could talk about our Congressional Black Caucus being, as you said, they're busy with this, they're busy with that. But these are the things that they need to address, right?
Yes, they need to address that. And we need to be the ones to bring it to their forth. Sometimes, Stacey, this culturally, we as Black people, we tend to look at our representatives and our legislators as somewhat superstars. We look at them as the congressman is here, the congresswoman is here, the assemblywoman is here. And we really don't oppress them in terms of issues about what's going on in our communities. And I say that because white people are totally different. When the white congressman or the white legislator comes to a meeting, white people make it very clear what their agenda is. And they make it clear, they have an action plan, and they give it to that white legislator and say, this is what we want you to do. But what we as Black people, because we're so new to this process, and yes, we are new to this process, we're just so enamored of the Black legislator, we just kind of like look at that person starstruck instead of asking them the tough questions and giving them an agenda they need to fulfill.
Yeah, well, I don't think Walter Hill looks at any of them as stars or superstars. Walter seems like, he's very serious about his position there. And so they should reach out to the Walter Hills. It's just, and the way that it's supposed to be, Walter shouldn't have to reach out to them. They should be reaching out to Walter Hill. And Paris Brown says that Shirley Chisholm refused to sit on a committee where she couldn't make an impact in the Black community. So that might be the major difference between the Congressional Black Caucus today than in the 1970s. So we will see, James. James, by the way, you ever watch Mike Tyson's show, his online show? Because if you haven't,
I haven't seen that, but I've seen throughout my career and life Mike Tyson so much. Yeah, I've seen a lot of him.
Well, I got to tell you, it sometimes contains language that you don't want your children. I don't even want to hear at times. But then there are some shows that he puts on. For instance, there was a show not long ago where he had the former welterweight champions Sugar Ray Leonard and Thomas Hitman Hearns on. It's the most hilarious show. Most hilarious, serious show you'll ever want to see. Mike Tyson is a comedic genius. I'm going to tell you that much. However, speaking of Mike Tyson, who obviously once looked so indestructible in the ring, is now 56 years old, and he seems convinced that he doesn't have much time left on the earth. During an interview with his therapist, Sean McFarlane, on Hotboxin with Mike Tyson's podcast, he said he talked about his own mortality during a larger discussion about financial security and the impact of money on one's happiness. This is what Mike Tyson had to say. He says, we're all going to die one day, of course. And he was speaking with DJ Who Kid and, of course, his therapist, Mr. McFarlane. Then he says, then when I look in the mirror, I see those little spots on my face and I say, wow, that's my expiration date. It's coming close. It's really soon. He says, even now, money don't mean anything to me. I always tell people they think money is going to make them happy. They've never had a lot of money before. When you have a lot of money, you can't expect nobody, this is Tyson's words, nobody to love you. Mm-hmm. How am I going to love you? How am I going to confess my love to you when you have $500 billion? It's just that, the false sense of security. You believe nothing can happen. He goes on to say, you don't believe the banks could collapse. you believe that you're invincible when you have a lot of money, which isn't true. That's why I always say money is a false sense of security. But
Mm-hmm.
the big picture here, well, I say the big picture, but the most important thing is he was actually saying that he doesn't believe he has long to live. Now, he didn't mention any illness. He talked about spots on his face. Um, should he's talking to a therapist on his show, his own therapist. Should we be a little concerned about Iron Mike Tyson?
I I think what is happening with Mike is that he's coming to grips with his own mortality. You know, most of Mike Tyson's life, he's been held up to the standard by not just the press, but by people in general. So we never really got to know who the real Mike Tyson is because people like us, D'Amato and Amato, they were just kind of using him, Don King, as a show. We never really got to know him as a person. Actually, one of the things that is kind of sad is that Michael never developed the chance to develop his intellectual gifts. He's not a dumb person. He's
Oh
very
no, not
smart.
at all.
He's
Yeah.
very, very smart. And I think that but he's coming to terms with his own mortality. Now, whether he's going to die tomorrow or a year from now, I have to be on the betting man and say that's not going to happen. But he's coming to terms with his mortality, and he is evolving like all of us. He's just evolving right in front of our face. So I don't panic. I don't think he's going to die anytime soon. Those little spots are what little spots I'm getting to. So
Uh-oh.
you shouldn't worry about that. People shouldn't worry about that. But he's growing and he's evolving, and that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, 56 years old, who doesn't start thinking about that at 56, 55? James, I'm not sure how old you are, James, but do you think about those things?
Well, I just turned 30, but when I get to that,
There's a rule on
I
this
will
show.
start thinking like
There's
that.
a rule on this program that we are to tell the truth. You haven't been 30 since you've been. I mean, come on.
But of course not. But the thing about it is that he is coming to grips with his, he's now been. See, Stacy, what he's doing, he's sitting down, he's thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'm not going to die tomorrow, but my goodness, my time on this earth is limited."
James,
So,
but
yeah.
let me interrupt.
Yeah.
Because I think this is important too. But in all of this, he's making a really great statement, I believe, when he talks about how money doesn't really, especially when it comes down to mortality. We saw it over the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, the first year anyway, where folks, entertainers, big time millionaires and billionaires, they really, the money couldn't help them. Yeah. They were as isolated as we were. Yes. In fact, I tell you what, we had some of the biggest superstars come on our program because they had nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they wanted that attention.
You're absolutely right. And Mike is absolutely right about money being false security. We live in a culture that worships money and worships the almighty dollar. And this man generated a lot and earned a lot of dollars. So he is kind of qualified to talk about such things like that, as opposed to some folks who wish they had a lot of money and they fantasize about money, but they don't understand the responsibilities that come with money.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I just thought it was very fascinating that Mike Tyson would talk about the aspect of the money aspect of it. I mean, as we know, when you get to a certain age, you certainly start to think about how much time I have left. It's just a human nature. No matter you're black, white, no matter you're a former heavyweight boxing champion or you're a welder, you just think about those things. But the money aspect is really interesting. Yes. Money can't buy love, they say, yes. Right?
It sure can. It
can't buy happiness.
Money can't buy money. It cannot buy love. Cannot buy happiness. Not at all.
and it can't extend your life. I mean, it's just the way it is, James.
Yeah.
Well, but James, lots going on. We'll keep everybody abreast on this show. We really appreciate you for coming on, and we look forward to your next appearance. Bobby Henry, Johnny come lately. Bobby Henry writes in that time has come today. Bobby, I'm going to give you a call because I have no clue as to what that means. So, I mean, unless he's speaking patois or something like that, you know. But nonetheless, we thank you for joining Let It Be Known, and we will see you tomorrow.